Good evening, everyone, and a really warm welcome to Linda and Dr. Toni, who are joining us for this live event tonight. Thank you both for coming along. I know that, like me, you are both very passionate about, well, birds in general, but specifically passionate about this topic because, like me, you've both experienced firsthand some of the negative side effects that this particular trend has had on our parrot companions. So I really appreciate you both taking time out of your very, very, very busy schedules to be here tonight and talk about this, so we can hopefully get, just spread some education. So yes, wonderful. So Toni's joining us from her vet clinic. Linda's joining us from home. Hopefully she's had a bit more sleep now that some of her babies are out in the weaning aviaries instead of in the nursery. So just a really quick introduction. Obviously, if you've watched a live with us before, Dr. Toni has joined us previously for a live. So Dr. Toni is an avian vet with quite a number of years experience, and she now runs she owns Perth Pet Vet in Perth. She sees all species, but obviously has a passion for birds and shares her life with two macaws, a black cockatoo, and a corella. Have I got them all?
Yeah, of the feathered variety, yes.
The feathered variety, yeah. I'm sure there's many others. And Linda is a very long-term breeder. Linda primarily focuses on large macaws now, but has a background in many, many different species, including black cockatoos, lorikeets, eclectus parrots, gang cockatoos, corellas, white cockatoos. So she's been very involved in hand raising and has a real background and a lot of hands-on experience with what can go wrong with raising baby birds and how to do it the correct way as well. So she brings in realistically a lifetime of experience here hand raising birds. And something that Linda does as well really regularly is help people in this situation. So people that have taken on their DIY hand raised bird and gotten themselves into a bit of a situation. And so Linda gets a lot of messages and handholds and walks people through overcoming some of the hurdles and challenges that they've started to experience when they've taken on a baby bird and not necessarily been quite as prepared as they need to be in order to be successful with that. So lots of amazing experience here from our two guests tonight. So I'm going to be leaning heavily on them. All right, so we'll get straight into it. I do want to say that if you have questions, you are welcome to pop them down in the comments. I will just note that we do have a lot to get through and we have two incredibly busy people joining us. So I want to make sure that we make the most of their time and also not keep them for longer than I said we would. So we will try and answer questions if we can. If we can't, then we'll try and pop back to them maybe at a later date and answer them. So do pop them down there, but please keep them polite. We know this is a very fraught topic, that there are a lot of differing opinions on the subject. So if you do have a differing opinion, that's totally okay. Feel free to express that, but just make sure that you're expressing it in a polite, kind manner. We also have some videos and photos to go along with our talk today. I do want to warn people in advance that some of those videos and photos might be distressing to see. So I will try and give everybody a warning before I bring them up on the screen. That'll let you, turn away or, pop it down if you need to before they pop up. So just be aware of that. I will try and warn you if you do think that you're going to be quite distressed about photos of significantly underweight baby birds or baby birds with Cockburn injuries and things like that, then my other recommendation would be to just maybe listen to the audio and maybe just, not quite stare at the screen the whole time. So just something to be aware of. All right, we'll jump on in. So, Toni, this is, obviously you run an avian vet clinic, so, and you're only one of a few vet clinics in the Perth region that specialises in avian. So, I'm sure you see quite a number of avian patients as well. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the big issues that you see coming in when you have these not fully weaned babies that have gone off to their new homes to be hand raised for, that better bonds that we're told we can get by hand raising our own birds?
Yeah, I was really glad when you asked if I would be a part of this talk, because it is something that I feel really passionately about, being an avian vet. We do see some really distressing cases that come in through, I guess, people, wanting to hand raise birds, or have been buying or being sold a bird that's not properly weaned or unweaned. And the consequences of some of the things that can go wrong. And later, I'm sure Linda will go into the nitty gritty, but it's a tough gig. You have to get so much right. You have to get temperature right. You have to get food consistency right. You have to get the volumes right. There's just it's really not as simple, I think, as a lot of people think it may be. Probably the biggest issue that we see is birds that are malnourished. So they present either as being severely underweight. Some of these birds may be unweaned or have been bred by people who are deciding to give hand rearing a go. And the birds aren't, getting the right nutrition. So as a result, they're underweight. They develop problems with their bones, with their feathers and things like that. The other common thing that we see is injuries to the crop, through food being fed to, as well. And again, these have, devastating consequences, not only for the birds, but often for their people. So people who have wanted to give this a go, or have unknowingly or knowingly, bought an unweaned bird, and then things go wrong, and then it's distressing for their owners as well. So it's an emotional roller coaster ride with some of these birds. So yeah, it is a topic that I feel really, really passionately about. Did you want to have a look at some picture examples now?
Yes. So what I'll do is, so just a heads up, as earlier, I'm going to bring some photos up now. They may be distressing for some people. So just be aware, if you're not, really wanting to see it, then my recommendation would obviously just to continue to listen to the audio, and you don't necessarily need the video portion of it. Okay, so this is a photo that Linda sent through to me. So I believe this is a 15 to 18 day old blue and gold macaw chick. So this demonstrates, and I'll show you another photo in a second that will really give you that kind of contrasting idea of what's wrong with this photo if you don't really know what you're looking at. But Toni, could you, or Linda maybe, do you want to walk us through what you see in this photo that's concerning?
This actual chick was 22 days old. So they thought it was 22 days. There were two. One was 22, one was 24 days old. Both were in the same condition. But if you look at this chick, apart from it's dreadfully thin, he's got that enlarged head that says it's malnourished. And if you look, it's got an empty crop. A chick of this age should never have an empty crop at any time. It has a lot of catching up to do. And it actually did catch up fairly well, but there was an issue with flight later down the track, and probably because of metabolic bone disease.
So with metabolic bone disease, I'll just, I guess, explain a bit about metabolic bone disease to people that might not know much about it. These guys, birds, if you compare them to lots of other, I guess, mammals, grow at an incredible rate. So that they grow really, really quickly. If they're not getting the correct amount of calcium, vitamin D, phosphorus, and the right amount of nutrition, then they develop weak bones that don't support them. And the consequences that we see of that can be things like folding fractures. So if you imagine a green branch of a tree and then you bend it and it bends, but it doesn't snap, it folds in on itself. It's called a green stick fracture. We see lots of folding fractures or green stick fractures in the wings and the legs of these birds because their bones aren't strong enough to support their weight. With the reference to flying that Linda mentioned as well, they can have malformed bones, so the bones can be curved and too short, so they have bone irregularities and deformities that can interfere with flight later on as well. The beak in the picture of the little bird that you saw there looks, very, very prominent towards compared to the rest of the little bird. That beak, though, will be soft. Sometimes it can feel like very, very soft rubber. And again, when you're relying on a beak like that to be able to open walnuts, almonds, chew and do all of those things. If you've got a soft beak, then, we see lots of beak injuries as a result of that as well. So, big, lots of consequences of metabolic bone disease. The other thing,
I was just trying to find a quick, like maybe an X-ray or something that I could bring up and, there we go. Oh, the size isn't fantastic. Hold on, it gives you kind of, I guess, an idea of what Tony's talking about with regards to how the bones form. And maybe, again, if you don't know what you're looking at, it might not seem like terrible to you, but if you know what you're looking at, that's obviously just not right.
So you can see, there's a big curve just above the foot in those in the bones there, looking sort of like a big C. They're bendy. They should be sort of nice and straight. So, that's where I'm looking at there. And those bones aren't strong enough to support the weight, the weight of the bird, and so they can bend, but they can also fracture as well, which is, painful for the little chicks and can lead to problems when they get older as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So that's when Linda was mentioning that the bird, the young bird that we had the photo up of before couldn't fly. The likelihood is that bird was suffering from metabolic bone disease, and that was part of another photo of the same bird, I believe. So, Linda, if you wanted to continue.
It's really just as Tony said, you can actually even see the curve on the spine on this baby. There's an abnormal curve, but the problem with this actually came from somebody who bought two and only one survived, but the survivor did catch up. It feathered, and I think it weighed about 800 grams in total, where it should have been about 1 kilo. But flight was an issue. And you can just see it all unfolding in front of you. But the big problem here is these people that buy these birds, they are virtually conned by breeders that just say to them, well, if you want the bird to bond to you, then you're going to have to take it now. And, people believe a breeder rather than do a bit of research themselves. And it's very sad that these breeders get away with this because they know that they have just saved themselves 10 weeks work, at least 10, 12 weeks work. and an instant profit because they don't charge much less for them, and a bird that's chances of survival and reaching its full potential are reduced dramatically. I would say very few actually reach their true potential, because there are so many hazards along the way that none of them ever know about, and the breeders certainly don't tell them. And the breeders, once they've got the cash in their hand, a lot of breeders, not all, don't even answer their calls anymore. Once the first 24 hours is over, that's it. They cut them off. Can you put a photo up, Lee, of what that bird should look like at that age?
Yeah. So this is the photo, obviously, of the about 22-day-old macaw chick, blue and gold macaw chick, and this photo here is of slightly younger macaw chicks. Those are green wings, aren't they? I think there's another one here. There we go. So a similar, probably slightly younger, I believe, aged blue and gold macaw chick. So you can see the absolute, just massive difference between those two birds and where they're at. The other bird doesn't even have feathering yet. And I think this bird was maybe 18 days old, you said, so even a couple of days younger than that bird in the previous photo.
That one there is actually 5 days older.
Okay, cool.
And that's how they look. Round, plump, always food in the crop, head in proportion to the body, and pads, wings with fat pads. That previous photo, there was zero fat, none.
That's, so I'll just flick back to that one again. Or actually, I'll flick back to an earlier one because it showed the side on of the chick quite well. So if you look at the wings, there's no fat on the wings or on the body at all. The head is just, like Linda has mentioned, is really oversized in comparison to the body size. Whereas if we go back to the chick that's of a good weight, you can just see that difference. And Linda, can you tell us what the primary contributing factors are to this happening with a chick? Like, how does a chick end up in such condition in at less than 3 weeks of age, or around 3 weeks of age?
Usually you'll find with a breeder that's not, that has a lower standard of care, the parents to start off are probably not fed the most nutritious diets. That then relays on to an embryo that's not reached its full potential at hatch. That then leads on to a hatchling and a chick a couple of weeks later that is so malnourished because it's not had the correct nutrition from pre-egg stage. The parents have not had the nutrition. So most of the people I get these photos and queries and questions and they're in massive trouble, most of them, is nobody's told them how much to feed. And these chicks were getting, I think it was 30 mils when they should have been getting 75. The other thing is, because they don't know the correct temperatures, they're very often feeding them too cold, because nobody ever thinks to test with a thermometer and make sure the feed is at 41, 42 degrees. So they're getting a colder feed. The crop doesn't work very well on cold feeds. And then because the crop's not working very well, they thin the feed down, believing that thin feed goes through a crop quicker. It's actually the complete opposite. The crop will only work well on thickened feed when it's got something to work on. It can't work on as well on fluids. This chick isn't so much dehydrated as just malnourished.
Yeah. So a combination of, like you said, a poor start in life, but then, it's just a lack of understanding quite how much these birds require food-wise. So we're seeing people that are feeding maybe half as much as they should, if even that, less than half of what they should be. And I think, from what I am not as involved as yourself, obviously, and I don't get the messages about these sort of situations terribly often because I'm in a different kind of, I guess, line of work. But my feeling is also that often people are not feeding often enough, that they're leaving too big a gaps between each feed as well, so that crop empties because they're under the impression that needs to empty before they do the next feed. So not only are they not getting enough food during each feed, but maybe there's also just not enough feeds happening per day. Is that something that you see as well?
Yes.
Definitely something that...
Yep. Sorry, we've got both of you. Toni, did you want to quickly...
Yeah, I was just going to add that's definitely something that we see. Temperature of feeds, you come and you ask, what temperature are you feeding at? Oh, it's warm. Okay, but what temperature are you feeding at? Oh, we don't measure, we put it on our hand, or, it's warm to touch, or it's body temperature. So, there's not a consistency to that temperature. Food also cools down really, really quickly. You might mix it up. If you leave it stand there for a couple of minutes, and it drops 5 degrees. So it's keeping that food at that consistent temperature and keeping it warm as well, because when it goes cold, it does move slower through the crop, and that can set up the other issues that we see, like crop stasis, which Linda alluded to, when the crop's not working properly and you start to get an accumulation of food in the crop that's not moving through. That can be a result of, the incorrect temperature or temperature variation, the food being too thin, as well as, I guess, hygiene, making sure that everything's disinfected and things like that as well. But yeah, definitely with temperature and things like that, I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the classic things is what they don't take in a feed, they put it back in the fridge and reheat it. With all the bacterial growth that's going on in that, these chicks don't stand a chance.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, so yeah, this is, and this, I think what we want to stress here is that this really just comes down to hand-raising birds is a lot more complex than most people seem to realise. And as Toni was saying earlier, people often, they want to do it because it sounds like it might be, an interesting experience, fun, or they're told that it's going to improve their bond with their bird, so they should do it. But then there are all of these intricacies, and when we don't quite understand what those intricacies are, we don't have the right support, because, like Linda has said, sometimes the breeder will just hand the bird over and that's it, done is done. We end up with birds that are not getting the right temperature feed, not getting the right amount of feed, not getting fed often enough, and this is the result. And this is heartbreaking. It's, this is a baby bird who is essentially starving, which is really, when you think about a heartbreaking situation, to, these little baby birds that are just suffering because, we are putting them in these situations. So, and again, I'll just bring up the, again, for contrast, this is what that bird should look like. And it's just a totally different situation, a totally different bird. And I think it's, it's important to stress that even if you catch those birds up, so even if they don't die because they're so malnourished, even if you catch those birds up, there are lifelong, I guess, side effects for that. And it may be, very likely is life-shortening for them as well. So I think that's really important to, you can go, oh, well, they caught them up and now all is fine. But it's kind of not, because we're likely looking at a bird with chronic health issues for the rest of its life as well.
Can I just add in something else that people don't think about? When they buy these unweaned chicks when they're very young, and some buy them at 2 to 3 weeks. We actually had one bought a hatchling. They didn't have a brooder. They had no idea. No, The odd one will have a homemade brooder with a light globe in it, thinking that will be okay. They've got no idea of temperature control, how to slowly drop temperatures, no humidity control, no humidity and temperature monitoring altogether. And that in itself causes all the metabolic problems when they're trying to digest food, when they're cold or they're too hot. They've got no idea. And we still get these breeders that will openly lie. Just this week, I've had a lady who contacted me and said, how do I start to wean this baby? It's 9 weeks old. She sent me a photograph. The baby was only between 5 and 6 weeks. It was nowhere near ready to wean. It had another 10 weeks to go before it weaned. But the breeder told her, no, just top it up at night. But it wasn't eating anything during the day. It was too young.
Oh, God.
I think if just, I guess, moving, something that we see very commonly over here in WA is cockatiels, and they're sold as being fully weaned, but they present to us as really, really weak, very, very thin. And what has happened in these cases is that there's been an assumption that the bird is actually, eating seeds or eating pellets, and the next day it's moved on or sold on. People, aren't educated to monitor to see if they are actually cracking seed and cracking pellets, to see if they're, ingesting that food rather than just playing with it. So I get a lot of very, heartbroken families that present these birds that should be weighing in, around the 80 grams, and they're in their low 60s, just because they're seen to be at the food bowl, but they're not actually eating. So, they're just not aware of the signs to look for. And they think they've bought a bird that has been weaned, and maybe it's on the cusp of weaning, but birds can regress when they go to a new home as well. It's all very stressful, so they can regress. And if that bird isn't confidently eating on its own and self-sufficient, then they drop weight incredibly quickly. I mean, this can happen in 3 days. You can go from having a bright cockatiel, for example, to 3 days later, one coming in, at around 60 grams, dehydrated, starving, and a very upset family because they've fallen in love with this little creature. Yeah, it's very sad.
I know my own here at the moment. It's 13, almost 14 weekers outside, and if you look at the dish 2 hours after you've given it's almost empty. And then you collect everything that they've dragged out and pulled out, and they've eaten virtually nothing, but they've had a great time playing with it. But actual consumption is nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's very hard for people that have never raised a bird before to try and understand that playing with food does not mean anything's actually going down. And for several weeks, mine have been doing that. It's just normal. I mean, they might eat a little bit, but not enough to sustain them. No way.
Yes, I think it's really important that, this to check, say how long has the bird been weaned for, how long has it been like independently eating food without the need for formula top-ups, because the answer to that should be a minimum of 3 weeks. 3 weeks, absolutely not required formula, it's holding weight. And if that's not the answer that you're getting, then that bird is not ready to go home yet, because there is a really high chance, like Toni said, of that bird regressing and then really going backwards really quickly and getting quite sick because they're not consuming anything at all.
It's common in some species for them to regress, very common. So you have to be aware of that. But you also need to be aware of how to feel a crop and know what's in that crop, whether it's just water, whether it's a little bit of soft food, whether it's some solid carbs. You've got to know the difference, because without knowing that difference, you have no idea what's going on. And sadly, these breeders, they know that. They know all this, but they just choose to make a quick turnover. And the quicker they pull these chicks from the nest at a young age and sell them, the quicker those parents will go back down and lay again.
Yes, yeah, and that's, I guess, like you said, it's also part of that process. It's, yeah, they can get the birds down faster again and more chicks. So it becomes, a farming situation where, the hardest of the work is actually sent off with the people that are paying, a chunk of money for these animals with no support or assistance. And I think that's a big takeaway here as well, is that if you're buying a bird from anyone, aside from looking, looking for a reputable breeder, or it doesn't have to be a breeder, it could be a hand raiser. But whoever you're buying from, they should be providing ongoing support after you've purchased that animal as well. They should be there to answer your questions if your bird is regressing or something's going wrong, because that's, you need that extra little bit of support in those early days. And again, it's a nice way to weed out the good from the bad. What sort of support do you provide before and afterwards? So.
Yeah, these chicks usually have no identifying. They've never been to a vet, so they're too young to be microchipped, or most of them don't have a ring on. So that's the breeder's get out of jail free card, because there's nothing to say that chick came from them. Nothing. There's very rarely is there a receipt, or they don't put anything in writing, because that way somebody can come back and say, hey, this wasn't the right thing to do. So they just deny it ever happened. But it's so many. It's not the odd one. I would say I get 2 to 3 a week with weaning problems, because they don't know how to wean a bird. Weaning a bird is a long, complex process that goes on from starting at about 9 weeks and can go on until 20 weeks without any issue. But you have to know that pattern of what they're doing, and whether that's normal weaning, whether they're maintaining weight. Nobody ever weighs them, because they don't know if that weight is what they should be. They don't even know how to feed them. They don't know about a feed response. So if they try and syringe feed a bird that is already malnourished and weak, they're going to aspirate it because it has no feed response. And they wouldn't recognize a feed response anyway. There's so many, huge dangers and pitfalls to people taking on a bird that's not fully weaned. And to get that myth gone, that the bird will bond to you better, is the biggest issue, because people have been told this for so many years. It's sort of embedded in their head.
Linda, there we go. You've come back. It's okay. We had a bit of an audio issue there for a moment, but it's all good now.
I think it's no good starting with the breeders, because the breeders know these things. It's starting with the companion bird buyers. They're the ones that have got to be fully educated on why you just don't buy a bird not fully weaned. My bird bonds with their new owners literally within the space of a couple of days. They're like, I've got one now, totally ignored me, a blue and gold, totally ignored me the whole morning, because there's no family with it. And he was like, no, I'm playing with these guys, but, go away. So when he I have no worries. And he's 17, 18 weeks now. And he's already bonding to them. And he's fully weaned and has only ever had me in his life. But he's bonding to these people beautifully, because they come and visit him every week. But the unweaned and bonding thing needs to be separated. You just should never use those two words in the same sentence. It's just wrong, just totally wrong.
Yeah, look, I agree, obviously, really strongly. And I think you're right that, you know, the place to start is with the consumers, because if the demand is no longer there for these birds, then it just, that they can't be sold unweaned. But while ever we're out there purchasing these birds unweaned, there's going to be those willing to sell them. And so, yeah, like, you know, like I said, you can't necessarily change the ethics of the people choosing to sell these birds at such a young age to inexperienced handlers and hand raisers, but we can make a difference by just educating the buyers about why they shouldn't do that. And when we can stop, you know, when we can reduce that demand enough, then it'll stop happening. But there's a long way to go. Certainly, you know, in my experience, unfortunately, there's a really long way to go. You know, I get a lot of people contacting me who, and I'll touch base a little bit more on the behavioural side in a little while. But you know, certainly as a behaviour consultant, most of the contact that I get is from people looking to get help for behaviour problems, and I'm still seeing so many people purchasing, you know, birds unweaned because that's in their behaviour history forms when they contact me. So it's certainly, yeah, and you know, or people contacting me asking me about, you know, breeders that sell unweaned, and I obviously have, you know, relationships with a number of breeders as well, and obviously hear stories about the number of times that they have to turn people away for that reason. They, you know, and everyone tries to educate, but I think in some cases, some people aren't, you know, quite ready to hear that that's not the best thing. So I wanted to circle back a little bit because I think the medical side is just so critically important here, because the behavioural stuff is, you know, I think that's, you know, important as well. But I think critically to this is that these huge health issues that are popping up and the suffering that these baby birds are going through is horrendous. Realistically, it's quite horrendous. So did you want to bring up a little video here?
A little video, yeah. If we could bring up the little video. Yeah.
Sure. So I've got a couple here, so I'll just choose one and go with that.
Yeah. So I think okay, so I guess in context, this bird is about 42 days. It weighed 128 grams, should have been weighing a kilo. So, you know, again, if you look at this bird, you can see there's no fat pads at all on the wings. You've got the prominent beak. You can actually see there's a little curvature in the spine there. There's a very weak feed response. This bird is dehydrated. Its skin looks all crinkled and shrunken, so it's dehydrated as well. If you just flip back to the beginning part of the video, you can see there is actually food in the crop of this bird, the little sac underneath the neck there. So even though this bird you know, had food in its crop wasn't emptying, so that food wasn't moving through. And crop stasis, I guess, is as it's commonly known, has got a multitude of factors that can cause it. But you know, in this case, things like you know, not the correct temperature, not the correct consistency of food, and you've got a bird that's 10% of what it actually should be weight-wise here. So even though there's food in that crop, the food's not actually moving, and the longer the food sits there, it tends to ferment, which is where the term sauerkraut, which a lot of people have probably heard. We get phone calls about sauerkraut a lot. My bird's got sauerkraut. So, you know, what happens when food's sitting there is that, it starts to ferment. If you think of a stagnant pool of water versus a running creek, where the water's nice and clear, you'd drink from that creek. You wouldn't drink from the stagnant, pond of water. And this bird had just basically gone into shutdown. All of its organs shut down. It was dehydrated. And it wasn't, even though food could go in, it just wasn't able to move through. So really, really sad little case, unfortunately. So what you can see here, is what we call like a little manufactured crop bra to try and support that that crop. The crop is it's an elastic skin. When it has food that's collecting in it for a long period of time or just sitting there, it's heavy, and so it stretches. Then when you've got a stretched crop, it can't function properly either, because it also relies on being able to, being held tight and being able to contract to help that food move through, so that the crop gets thinner and thinner and saggier and weaker, and then that perpetuates the problem with the food not emptying from the crop. So in some of these cases, we make little supports, little crop bras of various ways to kind of support that crop, to do, to take some of the pressure off it so it doesn't stretch. And that can be one of the things that, when we see these guys at the clinic, when we try to help, that we can do to help move things, through. Yeah.
Okay. And I just wanted to bring this photo up, because I believe that's a blue and gold there. Linda, this is one of your photos, so just correct me if I'm wrong, but so this is a baby green wing here, and the bird that we were just looking at in the videos is a green wing macaw chick. It's approximately 6 weeks old, and these are also macaw chicks at, Linda, how old were these chicks?
One's not even got his eyes open, so he would have been about 16 to 18 days.
Yeah, so you can see the massive amount of just lack of body fat. These birds are 3 weeks younger at least, and are obviously already weigh significantly more than that previous chick. But I do want to stress really quickly as well that although that previous chick that we had the videos of is an extreme case, the issues that Toni is talking about with regards to sour crop and the crop being stretched, that doesn't only happen in malnourished, unhealthy chicks like that. It also happens in completely normal chicks with inexperienced hand raisers who don't know what they're doing and who are maybe just not approaching the process correctly. The feed's incorrect in consistency or temperature. And so those issues can still happen. That's very extreme case of something going terribly wrong. But also it's important to understand that even a completely healthy chick like these chicks here could realistically undergo similar types of issues with their crop in the wrong hands. And I think a really big thing here is also to keep in mind that, things go wrong even for breeders and experienced hand raisers, but it's recognizing when things are going wrong and how quickly you recognize that. It can make a big difference as well. If you're too slow on the uptake, then unfortunately things can end really poorly for the bird. And that's more likely to happen if you don't know what you're looking at and you don't know that there's an issue. Whereas an experienced breeder will pick up really quickly, this is not right.
We see
that something's wrong.
Yeah, we see that sour crop, as I'll call it, in birds that have been sold as nearly weaned, but just wanting or needing those top-up feeds, that single top-up feed at night. So, fully feathered birds that are to some degree self-feeding, but if they've been told to give that, give an extra feed at night, then again, these are the birds where the temperature, the food's too cold, or it's not the correct consistency, they're feeding too much. That can, in 24 hours turn into a big issue, because that crop is such delicate tissue that it can stop working, or it can stretch really, really, really quickly. And they're in nearly weaned birds, so that was an extreme case that we showed you. But those birds that are just getting that extra feed at night, or that single feed at night, we see it there as well, unfortunately. While we're talking about crop issues, crop burns is the other thing that we see. And, I've seen this, breeders, experienced breeders, backyard, people just wanting to, to give things a go. And that happens when the food's fed too hot. The most common cause is people microwaving the food. So either mixing it up and then it gets a bit colder, then putting it in the microwave, or as Linda mentioned before, just making one big batch of food and then just reheating it. And the issue with microwaves is that it causes hot spots throughout the food, doesn't heat food evenly. So when you're heating food, you need to heat it in a bowl of water, of hot water, to get it to that temperature with a thermometer in there so that you're monitoring it. Because the consequences of these crop burns, can be devastating. If you think that food is put in too hot, a little spot of food or the entire feed, it's sitting in there in that crop, for a period of time. And what happens is that it actually burns through the skin. And there are some distressing pictures coming up here. This bird is a red-tailed black cockatoo. It's fully feathered. So this is, I guess, an image of a crop burn that will have been there for quite a period of time. These birds present because they're not gaining weight, or the owners might notice that they look a bit ruffled on their chest, or there's a bit of food on their face. They look a bit scruffy and messy. And then when you go parting the feathers, you find this, and this is a consequence of food that has sat in that crop, that's burned basically through the tissue of the crop, through the skin, and then outside. And they can be really, really small. So you can go on feeding these birds, but the food just comes out through the hole in the skin. They will, ingest some of it. We see these as either really acute burns. In those cases, people know, oh gosh, there's an obvious burn. It's happened really, really quickly. The burn, the damaged tissue, actually happens quite a few days later. So some of these birds will actually eat 3-4 days supported feeding until we go to try and surgically repair that, because the tissue, the burn tissue, is often more extensive than what's originally thought. This was a chronic case.
3-4 days supported feeding until we go to
we go in surgically, and we clean away all of that damaged tissue, and then luckily the crop is stretchy, and bird skin is stretchy, and then we're able to close it. And this bird lived, which is a happy outcome. But crop burns would be, again, one of the really common issues that we see at the clinic with, I guess, inexperienced people, and sometimes experienced people, feeding their birds. It can happen whether you're syringe feeding, whether you're spoon feeding, or using a crop needle. Probably a bit more common with crop needles because the bird's not actually feeding itself. There's another image here of food leaking out of the crop of a little bird. So again, you can see that skin is paper thin. It's, there's nothing to it. It's so easy to damage, with heat. Crop needles as well, and crop tubing. A lot of people asking, can you show us how to crop tube or crop needle? And the issues can go wrong, really, really quickly. You can perforate all the way through the crop. Something that we see in macaws is that they have a really, really, really strong feed reflex. If you go on Linda's Facebook page and you see them, they're pumping away. You got to hang on for dear life. So, using a crop needle in those situations, the food is deposited between the crop and the skin because there's a rupture in the crop, and then it collects under the skin and they can form abscesses. So, again, I'm not a fan of crop feeding, these young birds because of, consequences like that.
Yeah, it is super distressing, obviously, to see birds in that condition, young birds. and knowing that obviously that's causing them significant pain and discomfort as well. So I'm just we'll switch off to a happier photo for a little while. There we go. Let's pop a cute baby in there.
Really and truly, there are zero advantages to taking an unweaned chick from a breeder. Zero. The only advantage is to the breeder, not for the owner, and that's what these buyers need to understand. They're not gaining. They're probably going to end up with a vet bill, a sick chick, possibly a dead chick, and the breeder's already spending his money in Bali on holiday.
I just want to interject there that we see these birds from pet shops as well. So people buy, so not specifically just from breeders, but you can buy birds here in WA from a pet shop. And, they have, we see these issues from pet shops as well because birds are taken there too soon. So it's not, it's not just breeders, it's pet shops as well. And again, if that comes back to educating the consumer about what to look for when they're looking to purchase a bird. Absolutely.
And I did want to touch base on one more medical issue that I know pops up, and we were I think we kind of had a little bit of a conversation about this just before we popped in, but the one other really big medical issue that occurs with inexperienced hand feeders, but also we literally were talking about it happening with experienced hand feeders as well, is aspiration. So Linda, do you want to tell us a little bit about aspiration and why it's such a big risk in our young birds when we're hand feeding them and hand raising them?
It's a risk for breeders who are experienced. It's learning and having the experience that you deliver that food at the rate of the feed response. So if I've got a new hatchling and it has no feed response, that syringe doesn't actually deliver anything. The syringe just sits in his mouth, and the taste of the formula on the end is usually enough for it to start gently pumping for food, and you deliver according to that response. Young birds that are already underfed have a much slower, weaker feed response. So they might pump twice, and you start delivering that food, and they've stopped. And then they've aspirated what you've just put in. And as Toni will tell you, that if they survive it, you're lucky. You're really lucky. In 25 years, I had one chick that aspirated, but not during feeding. As I was walking back towards the brooder, it came off its headrest, because you need to support these headrests with a headrest. So as I was walking towards the brooder to pop him back in, he came off the headrest, put his whole body down low, put pressure on the crop, and it obviously came up and aspirated. I didn't think that chick would ever survive. It did. I was so lucky. It did. And it wasn't through incorrect feeding, so it can happen in the brooder. But it happens usually when they are 2 to 3 weeks, and their feed response will sometimes just... Most of them get a little bit lazy. Scarlets and greenwings are hopeless at it. They'll just suddenly stop and like, you dribble it in and I'll swallow. And you've got to be prepared for that. You then have to feed as per a swallow response. But if you don't know these things, or you don't have any idea what is normal behavior for that species, something's going to happen. And as you know, these birds cost thousands. So you've got to be prepared to lose a lot of money as well as lose your chick.
Yeah.
There's just no reason to get an unweaned chick. And the older they are to feed. So if you have a 10-weeker that is suddenly sold, or a 12-weeker, your chances of getting formula into that bird are remote safely.
Yeah.
It's
It gets harder because,
heartbreaking.
they're starting to refuse those feeds. It is heartbreaking. And Toni, obviously, I'm sure you see this, aspiration come in as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, I guess, how that presents and also the prognosis for a chick that has aspirated food into its respiratory system?
Yeah. So, again, for the same reasons that Linda just described, they're either too weak and they're not feeding enough, and they're being the food's going in too quickly. But the other common reason is just the tiniest amount of pressure on that crop. It's a sac; it just pushes the food up, and it's such an easy thing to do. You put pressure on that crop, and then they inhale the food. So essentially what you end up with there is, an animal, or particularly, a baby that has inhaled food into its respiratory system. So that food, even a small amount of food, causes a massive inflammatory response. We see them, if it's too much food, then they die pretty quickly, unfortunately, because it's suffocating them. It blocks their windpipes, so they're not able to breathe. Unfortunately, if it's a small amount of food, then they can develop what's an aspiration pneumonia, so an inflammation, but also an infection in their lungs. Birds have air sacs as well, so this leads to issues with them breathing. So they're not getting enough oxygen. They're weak. You can hear crackles. You can really see them sometimes open mouth breathing to try and get that oxygen in, but it can be really, really subtle too, just an increase in their respiratory rate. And one of the first things we'll do is we'll pop the stethoscope on, and you can hear the crackles of the fluid that's down, in the lungs, their sacs. You can, if caught early and the food's not, or what's been aspirated isn't too much, you can turn these guys around sometimes with antibiotics and aggressive sort of medical support. But even then, I've had birds that have had like an aspiration pneumonia, and you think that you've got them through and that they've recovered, and then they'll present 6 months down the track and either sick again or unfortunately have passed away. And on post-mortem, what we find is big abscesses throughout the airways and the lungs. So the consequences aren't necessarily immediate. They can sometimes be many, many, many months, down the track, unfortunately. So I think
which is super heartbreaking, because obviously now we've got a chick that's been in a home for it's heartbreaking regardless, but 6 months later is just very, very heartbreaking for those families.
Yeah, so I think one thing I'd say there is, if you have any concern that your bird may have aspirated, please take it to your closest avian vet, because the earlier that we can look at these guys, we can, early intervention can often help. So that's a big one. If you've got even the tiniest little bit of doubt, contact your avian vet, for an appointment. They'll be able to have a listen to the chest, and then note and monitor that chick, go through the signs of things for you to look out for that might show that there's going to be, something more serious developing later on.
What sad is that a lot of these people don't recognize that their bird is sick until it's too late. Now, I have a few that have contacted me saying, my bird's making a clicking noise when it's breathing. Okay, you need to get to a vet right now, today. I've been doing it for a couple of days. Then even more important, you get to a vet today. That bird's got food or fluid in its lungs. Oh, really? Does it matter? Will it cough it up? No, it needs care, it needs treatment. And if you don't do it, I mean, I was super lucky. My baby that aspirated was 4 days old, a baby greenwing. It was actually Quilly, the mum of my kids. And she aspirated at 4 days old and was white. And I was just so lucky that she started to breathe again. And she was on antibiotics at 4 days of age. And she survived it and has been great. I mean, she's 15, 16 now, a bit more maybe. But many people won't recognize what the problem is because they're not breeders. They've not done this before. This is the first baby they've ever tried to hand raise. And so the time they get medical care, it's too late. Just too late.
And you know, like Toni said, it could be quite acute, and you know, you could end up with a really sick bird really quickly, but also it may not be, you know, acute at all, and it could be weeks before the bird, you know, is sick enough to pass away. So it's not a, you know, and I think that's something we see often as well, as people don't realise how critical it is, especially when you've got a chick, that you get veterinary care if something seems to be wrong. And again, it's also a lack of recognising when something is going wrong. And this is, again, why it's so important to leave it to those people who know what they're doing. You know, and so I think, and we're coming up on an hour already, and we're only just finishing up on, I guess, the medical side here. But I think the biggest takeaway from everything that we've already said is that the risks are huge. The risks are just astronomical, and we're not talking about, you know, minor risks. We're talking about, you know, life and death risks, and that those in and of themselves, I think, should be enough to really keep people from going out and buying these unweaned chicks, because just the risks on the health side of things are so massive. And someone asked, why would anyone take an unweaned bird anyways? And it's a great question, and it's primarily because they've been told that if you hand raise your own bird, you're going to have a better bond with them. I've never had someone say to me, I hand raised my own bird for any other reason. It's because they were told if they did it themselves, they would have a better bond with the bird. And so aside from, and I guess that's a good segue into, you know, is that really the case? Do we really come out of it and have a better bond with these birds? And no, my answer is you don't. I mean, if we look ethologically at birds and how they grow and how they develop, you know, what we know is that once they fledge and wean and leave the nest and have started to become a bit independent, they leave their parents. It's normal. It's a part of growing up. And so why would we have a better bond with an animal that would naturally leave its parents to find friends amongst their conspecifics and the cohorts of juveniles that, you know, are similar age? Then why would we have a better bond with a bird that we hand raise when we're the parent and it's not natural for them to necessarily hang around with their parents forever? Just that is a flaw in the whole concept itself. And it's certainly an issue that I see popping up where people will contact me because they've hand raised a bird and then suddenly the bird is just behaving really aggressively with them, and they don't know why, and they're kind of heartbroken because they were told you'll have a better bond with this bird. And you know, anecdotal experience here, but I've had 5 different birds live in my house over the last 6 or 7 years, and they've all come to me from different situations. So I've got, you know, Maya, my green-winged macaw, who comes from Linda, who came to me fully fledged and weaned. I had Jester, who was also raised by Linda. So Maya came to me when she was fully fledged, weaned as a youngster. Jester came to me when he was about 2 years old and stayed with me for about 2 years. He had been fully fledged and weaned and gone to another home and then lived with me. I have Aztec, a blue and gold macaw, who I hand raised from 6 weeks of age after he was rejected by his parents. So I have a hand raised bird that I hand raised. And I've got an eclectus parrot who I got on a Suki feed. so before I knew better. And I have a black-headed Kaik who came to me at 8 years of age. And I can tell you right now that all of those relationships are different, but no one of those birds is bonded to me more than any of the others. Even the birds that came to me as adults at 8 years old or 2 years old bonded to me. All of the, like I said, the relationships are very different relationships. And if anything, the one bird that I did hand raise is the one bird who I have concerns about with regards to socialization with others, because he is, inappropriately bonded to me, because that's what that's created. And, that's something that we're working on. But there's actually more work for me with that bird in ensuring that he has a well-rounded behaviour than any of the other birds that I've taken into my life at varying ages, fully weaned, fledged, and even as adults. And I know Toni has a similar experience herself.
Yeah, again, I have a myriad of birds. I've got a red-tailed black cockatoo, a long-billed corella, and 2 green-winged macaws. I've got Safi from Linda, who I think a lot of people see on her page. I also hand raised, so Safi came to me fully weaned. I also have a hand-raised green wing that I took through different circumstances and hand-raised. And I would have to say, of all of the birds, he's the one that's least bonded to me. Particularly of him and Safi, he's the one that's least bonded to me. He's also, again, a bit more. Skittish around, the other birds as well. He wasn't raised as a bird. I didn't have the opportunity. He was raised as a sole bird. So he didn't get to learn a lot of those things. Safi was around when he was a bit older to help. But, again, in my experience, they've all got different personalities, and, even just potentially hand raising, Xander, Safi is, much more bonded with me, but also with, my family as well. Yeah.
I think what happens is that without flock support, these birds sort of get lost along the way. They just don't. There's so much of monkey see, monkey do goes on here that if I want to get somebody eating out of a dish that won't take formula, that isn't really interested in the dish either, I just put one that I know will into the dish first, and then put the other bird next. And the second bird jumps in because he sees what to do. The flock support is massive, and they learn so many skills by play fighting, and how not to fall on the floor when hanging upside down by one leg. They learn all those things by the rough and tumble that goes on in the weaning aviary. When they're on their own and they're inappropriately housed inside a lounge room with a family and kids and never see another bird, they don't know how to behave. They've got no idea. So then you get the problems that you then get, Lee. You get behaviour problems.
Yes.
Obviously, either forced weaned or they'll resource guard and be, quite nasty, and because you just can pick it up straight away. This bird was forced weaned. It's never been allowed to, take its time, abundance wean. Just give them anything and everything is nutritious, and let them pick their way through. Well, I can manage on my own now. I don't really want your formula, but. Single birds sold unweaned don't get that.
And I guess I'd reflect that as well. A lot of the behaviour issues that we see, and Lee would be able to elaborate on this, are birds that they don't know that they're a bird. They don't recognise another bird. If they see another bird, they're scared. They don't know. They don't think they're a bird. They don't know they're a bird, and that leads to, as you'd be able to, umpteen lists of, behaviour issues. That it's going to be a work in progress, but forever.
Yeah, absolutely. They basically grow up thinking that they're humans, and although that can seem I don't know, cute to humans, it's not, because it drives significant behaviour problems, especially as those birds hit puberty and move into adolescence and then adulthood. It really drives behaviour problems when they can't. They think they're, human, and they want to spend all of their day hanging off humans. They can't play independently. They don't know how to socialize with another bird. And then gradually that, turns into these inappropriate pair bonds with human caregivers. It really is so detrimental in the long run. Yeah, I think it's an oft unconsidered part of taking an unweaned chick is that you're not just taking a chick and putting it through those potential medical risks that we've talked about, but you're also socially isolating it from its own species. And there is plenty of studies on various species, not only avians, but in lots of different species, dogs, cats, humans, primates, on how detrimental isolation from your own species, from conspecifics, can be. And we don't really do it to other species. We don't do what we do with birds to other species. And, so when we're hand raising birds, we're already taking them away from that parental input. We absolutely need that sibling input. We need the input from their chicks, from the nest mates, as they're in the nest and also as they grow, because they do develop social skills. They develop fine motor skills. They learn how to play, how to interact appropriately, and it's really critical. And there have been some studies on housing young birds together and the difference it makes in things like stereotypical and abnormal behaviours as they grow up as well. And there was, quite a significant difference for birds that are co-housed when they're very young with conspecifics, versus those that are socially isolated, and the development of stereotypies and abnormal behaviours. And so stereotypies can be things like chewing on the bars or repetitive movements, and abnormal behaviours might include things like feather destructive behaviour and screaming. So there's plenty of information out there, both anecdotally and even from an evidence-based science perspective, that socially isolating these chicks so that we can take them home and hand raise them to have a better bond with them is actually just doing a lot of long-term damage to these animals. And we're talking about animals that live long lives. Whether you're taking home a cockatiel or a macaw, we're talking 20 to 80 years. That's a really long life. And so, behavioural health, I think, as a behaviour person, is my passion, and I think it should be treated just importantly as physical health. And so chronic behaviour problems can be caused by pulling these chicks away from their siblings at a really young age, and then not allowing them to develop those social skills correctly. So, and it goes on to affect their life for the rest of their life. So, and Linda, I know you have some pretty strong opinions on this area as well. You're really important to your flock queen, your baby birds. So did you want to add anything to that?
It's just, even buying a bird that's of a later age, people have no idea about weaning. None. They don't know how much nutrition they should have. They don't know. They don't know to look at fecal output and say, well, that's not enough. But it should be passing a lot more than that. So why isn't it? They have no idea that some species, I mean, obviously I'm more macaws now, but, if I see a macaw that's sort of doing the slow nod, that's saying, I'm hungry. Who's going to recognize that if they've never had macaws before, And so that bird continues to be hungry. I get people sending me videos all the time saying, oh, this is really cute. It's like she's slowly saying yes. She's hungry. She's very hungry, but they don't recognize it. And you know, it just goes back to, where are the advantages to buying an unweaned chick? There are none. There are none. And unfortunately, we get some of the pre-pliers in other countries that recommend that you get a chick at 6 weeks, because they have no idea how detrimental that is to that chick. I mean, I wouldn't allow my best friend that had 100 macaws an unweaned chick. I wouldn't do it, because that would mean that chick leaving its flock it's always known. And I know that person could feed and will recognize it, but that doesn't detract from the fact that the bird is going to suffer, because it's been pulled away from its flock way too early to emotionally handle that. But so hard to get people to understand. It boils down to, if people refuse to buy an unweaned chick, it would stop. But they perpetuate the situation by agreeing with the breeder to get it early on one sucky feed, and then you find out that one sucky feed, it actually needs at least 3 because it's too young. They're the only ones that can stop this, because you won't stop the substandard breeders doing it. It's only the girls that can say, okay, no, we don't do that.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I 100% agree. And look, I got caught up in that when I got my first bird. Like I said, she came to me on a sookie feed, and I didn't know any better. I know much better now, and I'll absolutely, the one bird that I did take that needed hand feeding was purely because it was a situation where it was like, this bird is being pulled from the nest and needs to be hand fed, and I did it with, obviously, Linda getting 1,000 messages a day.
Well, you did an awesome job, though. I mean, circumstances. I did this with Debbie 30 years ago. I bought him as an unweaned chick because I was told that's what you do, otherwise he'll never like you. Wow. Have I learned a lot since then?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and as to what you were saying, you said that you wouldn't even sell your best friend who's raised a bunch of macaws an unweaned chick. Someone had suggested to me at some stage that, they would send a chick home with me earlier, and I was like, I wouldn't take it. I have no interest in hand raising another bird. It was so stressful, and I know that there's no benefits. It's so stressful. So much washing.
So much washing.
And when you get an unweaned bird, why would I send anywhere else? I mean, Toni knew straight away she has to be weaned and independent, because that's what's best for her.
Yes. Yeah. And all we can do is keep disseminating this information and getting it, which is why we really wanted to do this, because someone needs to talk about it. And the thing is that I don't, aside from yourself, Linda, talking about it a lot, I don't see it talked about. I don't really see much information being just put out to the public on the topic of unweaned chicks from breeders or from anyone really. And I think it's because it's such a
it's an emotive issue, but the breeders will usually say, you've got to keep it quiet because we're not really supposed to do it, but you'll be fine.
And I think it's just such a contentious topic as well, that some people don't want to get involved in that potential conflict and upsetting people. And I do understand that. Look, I'm not big on conflict myself, but I think it's one of those things where it's the welfare of the animals that comes first. And so someone needs to come out and say, this is not okay. And these are the reasons it's not okay as well. Not just say don't buy an unweaned chick, but to actually come out and go, these are the reasons why we shouldn't be doing this, because like I said earlier, the risks are astronomical and and just so terrible, and the benefit is nothing. And the likelihood is, realistically, even if you get that bird through healthy, you're still going to have other problems down the track related to their behaviour, because they've been socially isolated, because we've inadvertently created a bond that's not really what we needed or wanted with that bird.
I've got somebody with a cockatoo. It's only a year old, doesn't eat any food at all. She has to feed it, and she doesn't know how to wean it. It's going to be a nightmare to try and get this bird to eat something. Everything I've suggested so far, I won't touch. She said, I spoke to the breeder, and the breeder said, just stop feeding him, he'll eat. Oh, he'll die. He won't eat, he'll die.
I just wanted to really touch really quickly as well, as a vet, I see the animal side, but I also deal with the families, who are devastated. They're absolutely devastated that they've lost this pet that's come into their life. And yeah, to see, the emotions that they go through. Sometimes, families with little kids, they've welcomed this bird into their life, and then to lose it, there's a massive human emotional impact there as well. So I think, yes, absolutely, from an animal welfare perspective, but on that other hand is people who unwittingly buy an unweaned bird and then they lose it. The emotional impact that has on the time that they've invested into this little animal, when they lose it, that it's devastating for me to see as well. And I think that should be highlighted.
Yeah, it's certainly, I can't even imagine the challenge of watching and having to support a family through that sort of situation as well. So, and I, wanted to add as well that, of all of the, many clients, homes that I've walked into or seen online, either or, work with both, I've not once walked into a house or walked into a consult and seen a bird who's been hand raised by the family that has a better, healthier bond with that family. Not once. I've seen lots of wonderful bonds between fully weaned, fully fledged birds that have gone home. I've not once seen this wonderful, magical unicorn bond in a bird that's been hand raised by the family themselves. It just it doesn't happen. So and I think
it's to sell a young unweaned chick, it's like a scam, because you just know, and every breeder must know that the chances are there are going to be problems, and the breeder will accept that, but the poor buyer, oh God. Wrong.
It's a horrifying situation. So as we've shown tonight, realistically, just such a massive welfare concern for these chicks. So, even if, and we've shown some pretty severe cases here, but, I think it's also important to understand that there are, gradients of issues, and that even if your bird doesn't have a huge burn in their crop, if you're putting in food that's too hot, it might not burn a hole through the crop, but it's still potentially doing damage. It's still potentially causing pain. Even if your bird isn't 10% of the weight that they're supposed to be, but they're underweight, they're still starving. They're still hungry all the time. And that is a welfare concern. And if you don't know what you're doing and you don't recognize these things, you're just not going to pick up on it. And these birds are suffering. They're suffering silently. And some cases, yes, they get help, but in other cases they don't, or they get help and it's way, way too late. And the only thing that can be done is to let that bird go peacefully, or as peacefully as possible. And that's horrifying. So, I know that we could all talk about this topic probably for another 2 hours straight. But being as we've been on for nearly 90 minutes now, we did have one question. It kind of relates, but also does not kind of relate. But Dan asked if they could ask a question. And the question was, once they've been weaned correctly and taken home to their new owners, do they grow up okay on their own, or is it best to keep them with more than one? The answer to that is that it's always going to be better, like in general, to keep them with a second bird. Like, if you have the time, the space, the money to do so. It's not better for anyone if you take on another animal that you can't correctly care for because you don't have the money or the means to do so. So I think that there are caveats to that, like, you know, ideally that is the best case scenario. If you have one bird, you have two birds, because they're highly social, and there is quite a bit of research out there that shows that they do better in pairs. And when I say pairs, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be different sex pairs. It, you know, it can be same sex pairs, which is better if you're not breeding.
Even
also we need
species, yeah.
Yeah. But we also need to take into account how that's going to affect, you know, other aspects in the long run, like vet care. You know, if we can afford vet care for two birds, which can be quite expensive, whether we can afford to have the right sized caging and equipment, food, and everything else that goes along. When you double your bird, you're really doing more than doubling. You know, when you go from one to two birds, really it's more like, you know, it seems like you have to have 4 times as much money and things to go along with it. So, so I think it's a big consideration. It shouldn't be just a case if you get a second bird because you think your first bird needs a second bird. You really need to be committed to having a second bird yourself as well, and making sure you've got the resources for that. And also understanding that it's pretty uncommon with macaws, but in some species you might co-house birds for years and then they don't get along anymore. And so that's, you know, understanding as well that can be the situation, and that you might then need to also interact separately with two different birds. Do you have the time for that? Do you have the space for that? So thinking in terms of worst case scenarios before we go out and do this sort of thing too.
I always advocate 2 of the same sex, because you're not going to have that thing where they then pair bond and want to know you. So if you have 2 of the same sex, I've got a few aviaries here that I've got 2 girls. One was introduced as a 3.5-year-old, and she's with my hand-raised green wing from here, and they're great. They will squabble when I walk through the door, and that's just because, you know, they both want my attention first. But they generally get on really well and are still very friendly. I've got 2 boys that live together because they literally chose each other and decided that we don't like those girls that were in our They've decided that they want to be together, and they preen each other and they look after each other and they protect each other. If I go in there, one will get in front of me to stop me handling or touching the other little boy. You know? They can continue living like that. That's fine. But you have to understand behaviours a little bit before you embark on getting a second bird. Somebody wanted to put an Indian ring neck with a blue and gold. No, not going to work.
Yeah, and that's a good note, is that we generally don't recommend mixing large and small species. You want birds that are of similar size for safety reasons. 99% of the time it's not a great idea, although it does depend, you know, it's going to depend on the size of your aviary and things like that as well, but most people don't have the aviary size to co-house large and small species together. But it's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question, and behaviourally, the answer to that is that they're always going to be better off with another bird of a similar species, another bird, essentially, another avian with them. But, you know, when we look at it outside of just the behavioural lens, we also have to take into account many other bits and pieces as well before we make that decision. So, Excellent. Awesome. Any final thoughts, Toni?
Look, I think that I'm really, again, I was really glad when you asked if I'd talk and be a part of this topic, because I do feel really strongly about it. I think that it needs to be put out there that it's not simple to raise a bird. The myth that if you get a bird to hand raise, it's going to be more bonded to you, I think definitely needs to be, you know, debunked. And, you know, I also hope to save families a lot of heartache from, you know, losing birds that that they've bought unknowingly, not weaned, or knowingly weaned, just to, you know, help the birds from a welfare perspective, but also help, the families, from, experiencing loss as well. I think it's a message that's really important to take away.
Yeah. Thank you. And Linda, any final thoughts?
Don't we? We need a strong legislation that's going to say, well, as a breeder, if you're going to sell an unweaned chick, we're going to come and seize your birds because it's an animal welfare issue. But we don't have that yet.
Well, yeah, our animal welfare laws are pretty soft as they are at all. So, yeah, I think we're a fair few years away from that. So it would be nice. In the meantime, please don't buy unweaned chicks. And, I think a big one here is that, unfortunately, we do often also see people who buy unweaned chicks to rescue them. So essentially, they're, they know that buying an unweaned chick isn't the greatest idea, but they do it because they think that, otherwise, the bird's going to go to someone else. It's going to be in poor hands, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is you're still just reinforcing that behaviour in that breeder or pet shop or whoever it is that's selling that bird. So it really has to be a hard and fast rule. Don't buy an unweaned chick, because whatever we're putting money in those pockets, whether we're doing it because we think we're going to have a better bond with the bird, or whether we're doing it because we think we're saving the bird or rescuing it, we're still putting money in their pockets. They're just going to go out. That same pair of birds is going to have another clutch of eggs, and in 3 or 4 weeks, there's going to be more unweaned chicks being sold from that pair. And so it's super critical that, you're not saving them when you're buying them. You're perpetuating the issue.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you guys, both you ladies, head off. Thank you so much again for taking the time to come and chat with me about this and bringing your experiences and expertise to the table to really break this down. And hopefully we have debunked that myth a little bit, and even if we only change it, help it educate a couple of people, I think that's, a couple of more people educated, and hopefully they'll go out and pass on the same message to others. And that's, we can just keep spreading that awareness. So again, thank you both so much for taking the time. And I'm sure I'll, have you both back at some stage to talk about something else, or to talk about this again.
Anytime.
Yeah. All right, ladies. Thanks everybody for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be back again soon with another Facebook Live event. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks.